What's up? What's happening? Welcome here to Lacrosse Now. I'm Travis Seldridge. Another great show we have on tap for you this week. Once again, we've got three guests, so no wasting any time with an intro. We're just going to get right into the guests. We've got Alyssa Murray-Cometti from IL Women joining us. The Power 100 freshman rankings list out on the women's side here this week, so we'll talk about that, including how the Terps have continued to reload. They have another stellar recruiting class. We'll talk about that. Also, a little bit about Caitlin Wurzberger. Is this her year for North Carolina? We'll ask Alyssa Murray-Cometti from IL Women. Talking a little fall ball with UMass head coach Greg Cannella. It's a new conference for the Minutemen this year. They move from the CAA to the Atlantic 10. First year of Atlantic 10 men's lacrosse this season. Conference looks loaded, so we'll talk to him about that. Also talking to him about what has been a difficult late spring now through the summer and into the fall as they lost Aiden Kaminska, a guy who is a bright young man for that program, passing away this offseason. So we'll talk with Coach Cannella about how the program has dealt with that. We'll also share some Hofstra stories with Josh Burns. He'll take us back to his college days with the Pride on Long Island. First of all, how did he get there? A kid from British Columbia, ended up playing junior college lacrosse on Long Island and then moving to finish up his college career at Hofstra. We'll talk to him how he got there. Also, he shares a terrific story about the first time he and Hofstra played at North Carolina, and it involves his now teammate with the Chaos, Jack Roulette. Great story there, so you'll want to stay tuned and listen to that. But first, a quick news item to get to before these interviews. Chad Sermon has been named the new head coach at Iona. Exciting time for lacrosse in general. We've seen a bunch of new women's programs start. Iona, a new men's program that is set to start in the 2024-25 season. Chad Sermon will be leading the way. He was a terrific player at Salisbury, won a couple of national titles at the Division III level. Also was a head coach at Mercer, most recently an assistant at Manhattan. So Sermon takes over at Iona. We wish him the best of luck as he starts to build out this roster in the hopes of competing in that first season in 24-25. So we wish him the best of luck as he gets ready. But now we're going to get to some of the interviews. We're talking about some recruiting, some players that will be playing right away this year as freshmen on the women's side. IL Women's Alyssa Murray-Cometti joining us to talk a little bit about that.
This segment of Lacrosse Now is brought to you by Watch Zingo.
So from IL Women, we have Alyssa Murray-Cometti joining us now. Alyssa, you guys are fresh off compiling your top 100, your Power 100 freshman list here. We talked to Ty Zanders last week on the men's side. We talked to you here on the women's side this week. And I know what an undertaking this is, so congrats on just finishing this list because it's not easy to go around. Walk people through what the process is to try to compile the top 100 freshmen in the country.
Oh, man. I mean, so this is based off of when I took the job at IL. This is my first official being heavily involved Power 100. In the past, I had given some feedback of what I knew about players, but I was really immersed in the process. And it's hard because all these players are so talented and you just never know. You never know what will come, who's going to develop, who's going to explode like the next Charlotte North who comes in and is just like blowing our minds. And you just never know. So you got to take your best guess, combine what they've done in high school to, what they project to be and just see how it goes.
Yeah, you'll know a couple years down the line how well you feel like you did at the end. The number one overall player in this freshman class is Corey Edmondson, the midfielder now at Maryland. What made her stand out maybe above the rest and get that number one ranking?
She is such a talent, and I think coaches across the country all would agree that she's just a solid two-way midfielder with extreme skill. Her quickness allows her to get her hands free to shoot so easily, and she's an elite finisher as well. We talked with Taylor Cummings recently, who was her high school coach, and mentioned that she put a lot of time in on the defensive end her senior year as well, which is just so important, obviously, for a two-way midfielder. And to learn from someone like Taylor Cummings, who had a little bit of success at Maryland, is really, can only imagine what she'll do at Maryland.
Yeah, right. To have a 3-time Tewaaraton winner talking you up, that's always a good thing. You mentioned the two-way midfielders, and you mentioned this before we got going, kind of the emphasis that some of these big programs are putting on those two-way middies. What have you found in what they've figured out as the importance of what that position is, especially now in the shot clock era?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think the shot clock era has changed the game in that sense where in a good way. And, it requires players that can stay on the field rather than run off to the sub box to get attack mids and D mids exchanging. You might have one or two players that you can get in and out, but you need to get midfielders up and down the field. And it's just so important to be able to play on both ends and not only be an offensive threat or not only be a defensive threat. And the best programs in the country, I think if anyone watched the Final Four, you watch these midfielders that are just workhorses logging tons of miles on the field, just going up and down. That is such a valued position and a valued skill set that not everyone can do. I certainly could not as a player. I don't think anyone recruiting me would have recruited me for a two-way midfield position.
Yeah, it takes a special type of athlete to play in the middle of the field, especially nowadays. We mentioned Maryland, and on top of having the number 1 overall player in Corey, they have 3 players in the top 10, 6 in the Power 100. I mean, look, this program really hasn't gone anywhere, but you had last year where it felt like maybe the Terps felt like they had to prove that they were back in that top 4 conversation. How does this recruiting class kind of help them reload to be back to where we've known this Maryland program to be?
This is just such a good recruiting class for them. They did a really good job. And, talking with Kathy Reese, it was just such a challenge for them because this was the class that was recruited mainly on Zoom. And so these connections that you would be able to make and bring kids on campus and get to know them as people off the field, it's just a really different challenge than what anyone was used to. So to put together a class that this talented is a really testament to the coaching staff at Maryland of, how they just came across and were able to express the way that they saw these players coming in.
Yeah, you hit on the COVID process. We were talking about this with Ty Zanders last week as well. Like this class, especially, just the recruiting process was so different than between having to recruit players and talk to them on Zoom to like relying a lot on film as opposed to seeing people in person as much as you normally might. How do you feel like it impacted maybe where players ended up? And do we feel like this could impact how many players end up staying on some of these campuses, considering like they just didn't have the same recruiting process as people may normally have?
Right. I mean, it's definitely something you think about. And there's no way of knowing until a couple of years from now or, by the end of this year. Yeah. The very earliest would be after this semester. But yeah, there's no way of really knowing how these players are going to fit because they had the unfortunate circumstances with COVID. And there's really no one to blame, I guess, of how that process would be fixed. But we'll just have to see. It's a big question mark and definitely something that I've thought about as well. Yeah,
the good news is the recruiting process has gotten back to where we were before. So
For sure.
Things have stabilized. It's just going to be really fascinating with this class. One of the other teams that stood out to me is Stanford, and they've had some great recruiting classes here in the last couple of years. I saw Riley Bouvier play this past spring. I was really impressed by her. She's in your top 20. They've got a handful of players in that 11 to 20 range in this Power 100. What have you noticed with Stanford and Danielle Spencer out there now really collecting a ton of talent now if you look through like the sophomore, freshman, I guess to the junior class as well?
Yeah, I think that Danielle Spencer is doing an incredible job out there. And I think that as a coach, you need to get like a couple of good, solid classes. And then it's like the trickle down effect. You see all these players saying they're good. I want to play with them. And you see these quality recruits coming in, and it just takes a few solid players to do something big for the program. And suddenly you're on the map and suddenly you're a top school. And, obviously the academics at Stanford speak for themselves. So that makes it pretty easy to sell that program. But She's doing a great job out there. And I think that it's very clear to these recruits that, if you're good enough, you're going to come in and play. You look at the success of someone like Ashley Humphrey, who just was able to step right in and be a huge, huge part of their offense. Players like Pete Williams, Riley Bouvier are really poised to make a big entrance.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun to watch. It felt like they started to get something going last year, and we'll see how they develop again this year. You mentioned some of those players that may play right away for Stanford, especially because of the situation. Do you have anybody else in mind that maybe isn't like a top 5 player, but because of where they're at and maybe a need for a team that you have a feel like may step in and be a name we start talking about right away?
I think it's obviously just so hard to tell a lot. I'm sure, as much as fall ball is worthwhile, it's a big part of just getting the freshmen up to speed and allowing for a little bit of adjustment period for them. So it's hard to kind of have any true idea. I do see someone like Emma Murphy at Notre Dame stepping in. They've had a couple of graduations on the attack side of the ball that she might be able to, go in and take that spot. And I think watching her at the All-America game, I'm sure people realize, the fact that I think she may have had like 4 or 5 goals, but she took like 11 shots in the game. And, an all-star game and you're creating 11 shots for yourself, you're definitely a pretty potent attacker. So someone like that, I look at, I definitely see Pete Williams being an impact player as well down the line. And it all just kind of just depends on the individual school of what their, openings were. But I mean, for the most part, I see a lot of these kids just getting in and making the most out of whatever opportunity they're given.
By the way, you keep mentioning Pete Williams. Binghamton, New York, not a city that's had a ton of lacrosse firepower on men's or women's side. Really cool to see her making a case to be an impact player right away out there at Stanford. We mentioned developing, and you go to a program like a Maryland or North Carolina, like you can be one of the best freshmen in the country, but you kind of got to find your way. And you look back a couple of classes, and Caitlin Wurzberger obviously came in with all the accolades as a freshman, has certainly made an impact. But now with Jamie Ortega gone, what do you foresee it being at North Carolina with Wurzberger, maybe this being now her time to take over?
I mean, I think that people look at North Carolina and may have thought like, oh, they're going to take a step back because they've graduated so much. And honestly, I look at the roster and who they've brought in through their freshman class and the transfer portal, and I'm like, I don't understand it. I think they're going to be, easily a top 4 team, if not higher, and contending for another championship. And a lot of that is Wurzberger leading the way. And I do have to say, I mean, she was not set up for success with everyone saying she was the Jordan of my gosh, what's something to live up to. My gosh, it would never be enough. But she's really, she has really come on strong her past season, and I'm sure this year as well. She will just really have more of a lead role for their offense as well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because her and Brennan O'Neill, like, they're not far apart on campuses. And, like, in terms of the men's and women's version, like, Brennan and her were so connected in terms of the early recruiting and how early they committed and they're number 1 recruits and they get on campus. And both have kind of, like, their first couple of years, they're playing on great teams, so they haven't had to take over. But I feel like now they're both in a similar situation where I wouldn't be surprised if both are Tewaaraton finalists this year.
Yeah, and it's just something about being an upperclassman and having these key experiences. And you look at Wurzberger's performance down the line of last season, and yes, you have all these stars that got accolades, but she was someone that was just so consistent for them, that was so reliable, and so just the fact that she is confident in her performance as a freshman and sophomore, now it's like, all right, it's my time. And she has all the experience under her belt as well. So I think that is just a huge advantage for her and a huge advantage for North Carolina.
Well, we'll finish up with this because you guys at the IL Women just came off a really busy weekend with your ID experience. What was that like? And I know this is part of the ability to start gaining some information maybe for these next couple of recruiting classes. What did you learn over the course of this busy weekend?
Well, I certainly learned that there's a lot of talent in the class of 24 and the class of 25. And it's really, you know, it's thrilling. It's amazing to be able to see the level of play that these young women are playing at. And it's so impressive. Their skill is unmatched. I think about, I just compare to when I was growing up playing, and it's just, all of these players are just so elite across the board. And I think the future is so bright for women's lacrosse, and coming away from this event, I'm still recovering from it. I think it was just so fun to watch these players. And obviously we're gathering information all the time. And, not every player that was invited was able to be there, but it was just a small piece that was, just very promising for the future in both classes. And, I look forward to watching their fall ball coming up in November and just continuing to follow their careers and evaluating.
Yeah, it's amazing. I did some different recruiting events over the course of the summer here on LSN. And you watch players who are sophomores and juniors in high school trying to shoot the ball like Charlotte North, and they're exceeding. They are just to watch the skill level even early on when they're freshmen, sophomores in high school, and watch how they're developing is really impressive.
It's so exciting, and it just, the higher the skill level of our sport, the more compelling it will be for viewers, and to, make it even more contagious across the country and internationally as well. And so I just think that the impact that these players that we've seen in the NCAA and internationally in recent months and years has just been huge for our sport. And it's just really exciting to be able to be a small piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the future is bright for the sport, and the future is now for some of these freshmen on this Power 100. Alyssa, we appreciate the time. Congrats on compiling the list. I know there's a lot of work that goes into it. Catch up on some of that sleep from this weekend, and we'll catch up sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We continue to check in on some of the teams around the country here in the fall. We've got UMass coach Greg Cannella joining us now. Coach, this is an offseason for you guys that creates quite the transition, because you're going from one conference to another in the CAA now to the Atlantic 10. You've been through this before. What's it like now being in a new league as you head into 2023?
Yeah, it's interesting because you have to learn what these other teams, the 5 other teams, are all about, right? We've only played St. Joe's and Hobart in the past. We haven't played any of the other folks yet. So it's really trying to kind of get up to speed on scouts, right? What they do best, what would be our approach versus those teams. But it's very exciting because, right now St. Joe's and Richmond are I would say the 2 top teams within the Atlantic 10 Conference. 2 great programs, and everybody else has really been strong within their past conferences, right? St. Bonnie's loses in their conference final last year, only being 5 years old, right? Yeah. As a program, 4 years old maybe as a program, right? Hobart was always there in the NEC, right? In the championship game last year. And I know, Richmond and High Point would battle it out for the SoCon, right? So again, very competitive league. Looking forward to it. But you kind of will develop those rivalries, over time. That we developed in the ECAC. In the early 2000s and the CAA here in the teens.
Yeah, I was going to say, you kind of hit the nail on the head. 5 years ago, this conference probably looks a lot different than it looks now. But with what St. Joe's has done and Richmond and High Point here over the last several years, you're looking at 2 teams from the tournament a year ago. Bonaventure is a game away. You guys were right there in the CAA tournament again. You're talking about 4 or 5 schools out of the 6 that were on the doorstep, if not in the NCAA tournament a year ago, and now you're all in the same league.
Yeah, it's true. And again, that's what will make it so competitive. And when you look at top to bottom or bottom to top, or however you would look at it, right? The coaching's fantastic. You look at what's going on down at Richmond with Dan Shamati and what he's been able to accomplish But again, Randy Mearns bringing the Bonnies from nowhere to a conference final. Greg Raymond over at Hobart has done a great job there. Just good stuff, right? Taylor Ray has been so involved with Canadian lacrosse, right? Team Canada, but was really catapulted St. Joe's from when he was in, back when he was in the CAA or the ECAC or CAA. I can't even remember the ECAC. We played them years back.
Yeah.
Right. I think 2013 was our last time we played them. And then what John Torpey's done down at High Point in terms of, starting that program and bringing it to become a national power as well. Just fantastic coaches within the league.
So, as a coach, do you have to, leave the CAA group chat and then, get into a new one? Is this getting traded when you're on a team roster? How does that work?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not sure if people are happy we're gone or, upset that we're gone or happy that we're coming in or joining a new league. It's interesting. But knowing all these coaches already obviously helps. But now it'll be the hard part is to get your players to understand who these folks are and what type of competition they'll be bringing.
For you guys in particular, the move is obvious because of the rest of the school being in the Atlantic 10. I do have to think for you guys as a program now being in the same conference as everybody else that's there in the athletic department has to feel it just kind of feels right and it fits.
It does. And I think the Atlantic 10's been trying to form a league for a while, and I'm not sure if they're interested in trying to get some other schools to play, right? On the women's side of lacrosse, I think there's 10 teams that are involved with the A10, and that group is formidable. So hopefully there's some other schools that maybe consider jumping on, right? It's Division I programs. But again, it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Kind of just to get to know everybody. But for us as a team, I'm not sure if it changes our mindset from CAA to Atlantic 10. But I think for our university and our athletic department, it's a really good thing.
So let's talk about this team. You guys have been one of the lucky ones to have some fifth-year grad guys the last couple of years that now have kind of moved on. So, where is the new leadership and some of the new pieces that you're looking for as you enter this year?
Yeah, there's some mainstays that have been with us. Michael Tobin is a senior now. He'll have a fifth-year option next year. Matt Note is in the same boat defensively. Jake Dulac on defensive end. Jackson Cummings on the offensive end with Gabe Prosick as well. And there was some younger guys last year that contributed quite a bit. Grant Brayo in the midfield and Shane O'Leary in the midfield have really done a nice job for us. That are junior and sophomore respectively. So that's where the most of the critical mass is right now. With those guys that are returning, we did grab a couple of fifth-year transfers that are helping. And Chris Campbell came from LIU, and Ryan Sharkey came from Canisius College. So those guys are adding. The one really good thing about COVID is some of these guys have had an opportunity to get a secondary degree, right? Our guys that are fifth years that are here. Gabe Prosick's getting a master's in accounting and so forth, right? Or like Ryan Sharkey's also in finance, getting a master's in finance. That's a good thing that's come out of COVID. It's also the opportunity for a guy like that maybe they didn't have a graduate program at his school that was suited for him to move forward and go somewhere else. And we're really happy about having both of those guys here and creating some greater leadership to add on to the people that are already in place.
You mentioned Matt Note, and he is getting ready for another year in the cage. I feel like he's been starting for almost forever now because he stepped in as a freshman and he keeps on going. What do you continue to see from him as he continues to try to improve?
Yeah, great summer for Matt. Really trains really hard, got a lot stronger, much better shape than he has been in the past. And obviously his confidence level is really high right now as an upperclassman and a guy that we're counting on to be a leader in the program. So really happy, obviously, to have him back. His voice is being heard a lot more, in a literal sense, but also down in the locker room as well, for the younger guys and the younger goalies as well.
Your locker room this offseason lost a member of it as Aiden Kaminska tragically passed away. And that, I know that's hard on any program. How has your program tried to cope with that? And how do you continue to try to help the program get through a really difficult time?
Yeah, it was a huge loss. It is a huge loss. And I think for us as a group, it's really kind of sticking together and talking through things, with eeach other. We've had some great help with the mental health professionals within our department this fall. I mean, obviously you feel for Aiden's family, who I've had a great relationship for over 30 years. And basically, you have to try to convince your guys that somehow this is what Aiden would want them to do, right? Would want them to work really hard. He was a hard worker. Would want them to have a great attitude. He had a tremendous attitude, and also to be fearless, because that's what this kid is all about still, right? He's a fearless guy. And if hopefully that can help motivate some of our players, and they can continue his legacy, continue and keep his memory, close to them, as we all want to do through that, right? We now all have the responsibility to, and we have Aiden in our hearts, and now we have to live it out, right? Each and every day, and try to be the best people we can be, best players, best sons, right? And best teammates, because he was all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking about it before we came on. Like, it's so hard for anybody who loses somebody who's a teammate or a friend who's close to them. But for a lot of the kids in the locker room, this can be like their first really difficult loss, and so it's trying to help manage people through those emotions that maybe you haven't been through before. So I can only imagine how difficult it's been. Yeah,
and that specifically, Travis, that you mentioned, is the hardest thing for young people to stand alongside an individual, and then a few weeks later that individual is gone. That's really difficult and hard for them to get through. Again, the best thing that we can all do is support each other and communicate and talk through it and help each other out the best we can.
So in transitioning from that, like, how have you felt like the fall has been, trying to get this group to come together? Because I feel like a lot of times that's what it's about. It's about some individual stuff in the fall, but also feeling like, how can you get this group to come together before you look ahead to the spring?
Yeah, I think when you go through something like we did with Aiden, it obviously already brings the team closer together. So when you go out to practice on the practice field, those guys are already pretty linked up with each other. And again, our fall practices have been strong-willed, difficult at times, right? As they always are, because you're trying to get some new guys up to speed and up to par to what your standards are in terms of the level of practice, not just the X's and O's, and then you got to worry about the X's and O's. But again, really strong effort. Hopefully with that comes greater execution as we continue to move forward through the spring. But also, we would hope that our leadership and our communication from our leadership down to the rest of the team also improves. And I think they've done a really good job with that so far this fall. There's been a lot of interaction. There's been a lot of off the field gatherings, dinners as well. So, in that sense, this could be a really tight team. Now what that means in the spring, I don't know, but I think what every coach hopes for is a group that's a together group and a group that respects each other each and every year.
Well, Coach, I know it's been a really difficult offseason, and continuing to think about you guys, the Kaminska family, and everybody as part of this UMass lacrosse program. We appreciate you taking some time, and good luck as you get ready for another spring season.
Thanks, Travis. It's great to see you and continue to be part of what LSN's doing. You guys are doing a terrific job. Thanks so much.
So let's move from a former CAA school in UMass now to a current one in Hofstra. Every week here on LSN, we've been throwing watch parties with different programs around the country. Hofstra was one of our most recent ones. You can see watch party every Wednesday, 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Lax Sports Network. However, part of the Hofstra watch party we had here in the last couple of weeks was having a chance to catch up with Josh Byrne, currently a member of the Chaos and the Bandits in the NLL, PLL, and NLL teams, respectively. And he took us back a little bit to his time at Hofstra. As part of this watch party, we caught up with Byrne talking about how he got to the Pride, one of his great moments, reliving a win over Princeton where he scored the game winner. And we also talk a little bit about his first matchup with North Carolina. So we're going to replay that interview that aired during Watch Party for Hofstra. Once again, you can see Watch Party every week, 8 a.m., 6 p.m. on Wednesdays. But let's catch up with Josh Byrne, talk a little bit about his Hofstra career. So the guy that scored that game winner against Princeton for Hofstra, Josh Byrne, joins us now. Josh, man, thanks for hanging out with us here on Watch Party.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
What do you remember about that 2016 year at Hofstra?
You know what? It was a bit of a blur. It feels like it was so long ago. But you know what? Playing on the turnpike, there's nothing better.
You know, that for you is your first year in Division I, coming out of Nassau Community College. Like, walk people through like how a kid from British Columbia ends up out on Long Island to play all this college lacrosse.
Man, if I told you the whole story, you probably wouldn't believe me. But yeah, somehow managed to find my way on the East Coast, and there was the coach I was playing for was a Hofstra alumni, and he kind of sent my film over to Coach T, and the rest was history.
What was the transition like from Nassau to Hofstra? Because I feel like at times, especially that first year, you made it look easy. Like what was it like?
It was, to be honest with you, scary. Like from when I was probably in 8th grade, I wanted to go and play Division I lacrosse, and it was always something that I never thought I was actually going to be able to do. But that was probably one of the hardest moments of my life was one of those first games and trying to figure it out. And I remember in practice specifically, one of my first practices going against, just the athletes are just so different when it comes from JUCO to D1, right? So guys like Brett Osmond, Finn Sullivan, I was going against, and they put my stick on the ground a couple of times and laid my body down too. So it was definitely the physicality part of it, and just how fast everything kind of moves was a really big adjustment.
You won your fair share of battles when you were there at Hofstra too, with some of your highlight goals. Give me your favorite goal during your time at Hofstra.
Oh, favorite goal? I don't know, man. There's a couple fun ones, but honestly, probably one of my favorite moments was that Princeton overtime winner. Just an unreal moment. Kind of felt like, okay, like I'm finally here now, and that was a really cool moment for me.
And in terms of games, like, did you beat Carolina a couple of times? Were you part of those teams?
Yeah, so we went down to UNC, and who is now one of my actually a couple of those guys are now a couple of my good friends. Jack Rowlett, it's funny, he tells a story to me that his coach didn't really have much film on me or any scout. And he was like, "Oh, you got the lefty JUCO Canadian kid. Like, don't worry about him. It shouldn't be anything too crazy." And I think I ended up popping a couple in, and he was like, "What's going on here?" But and then also a guy, Chris Kluche, who's I would say a well-known player for the Tar Heels.
Yeah.
But he was always fun to go against, and as well as a fellow lefty Canadian guy was always it was cool to kind of go head to head with him.
Obviously, I feel like that the 2-year run you were there at Hofstra, you guys really elevated the program. I mean, back in the national conversation, top 5, top 10 conversation. What's your favorite takeaway from your time playing for the Pride?
Yeah, you know what? There was a time there. I don't know how long it was, but where we were actually number 1 in the country. You know, being on the same team as a guy like Jack Cannon, who really he was the heart and soul of our team. And to be honest with you, if he's not on that team, we're probably not even in the top 20. So he was an absolute beast back then. And I remember just me and him being extremely close and just being like, dude, let's just do it for the Turnpike. Let's do it.
Well, and I think it's awesome to see like both of you guys now playing at the highest level. And it's like, I think anybody around that team, like I remember watching that team thinking, man, these guys are really good. But it's not until a couple of years later you go, oh yeah, this all makes perfect sense.
Yeah, you know what? It's crazy because you don't really realize how good of a team we had. You know, especially my first year there, it was a guy named Sam Linares who was absolutely disgusting. Ran into a couple of injury problems with his hips, but his first few years there was just absolutely gross there. And then Jack and Cannon net, Finn Sullivan, who plays on the Redwoods now, as our goalie. As our starting D guy. And then even a guy like, I don't know if Kyle Gallagher was there quite yet, but really all over the field, we were just littered with talent. I know Brendan Kavanaugh, who's played in the PLL for the last couple of years as well. There's so many good players that didn't even get to make it and really just kind of went on different routes and, you know, became big shots in the business world, but could have easily went and played pro. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, you've had a lot of talent over here the last several years at Hofstra. One of the other guys is Ryan Tierney, and so we're going to leave you, Josh, and we're going to throw to one of Ryan's great games, the Hofstra Delaware game from 2021. So we appreciate you taking some time. We'll leave the people with that. Thanks, man, for going a little blast from the past for us.
No, of course, man. 100%. Thanks, guys.
And remember, watch party every week, 8 a.m., 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Coming up this week, we have Drexel. The Dragons are our watch party feature. Some terrific games they've played over the course of the last several years here on LSN, including the time they upset then number 2 Hofstra back in 2017. That was an unbelievable comeback. So make sure you tune in to Watch Party this Wednesday with Drexel, 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern Time. As for now, that's all the time we have for you here on Lacrosse Now. We will see you right back here next week.